Welcome back to the After the License podcast, where we help real estate agents build their business. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you check out. You can basically get these podcasts anywhere you get podcasts. And if you're listening to the podcast channel, check us out on YouTube because I feel grateful. We've got Kenji Ignacio here, and we're actually doing a video interview, so you can watch this on YouTube. But Kenji, I found him on YouTube, is someone who started off in the real estate industry at a young age, got his real estate license at 18. So we actually share that in common, getting our real estate license, before we're legally able to drink. And so I wanted to bring him on. I've watched a few of his videos, and I think he's wise beyond his years and has learned a lot in the first couple years of selling real estate. And so for anyone who's thinking about getting their real estate license at a young age, I think this is going to be a great interview for you. So again, Kenji Ignacio, welcome. You're from Los Angeles, California. I'm in Arizona. Why don't you tell me a little about how you got into real estate?
Thanks for having me, Jeff. So I started selling in September of 2017. I got in, it's pretty interesting. Most of the best decisions I've made were not as a result from my decisions, but more of someone else pushing them onto me. So it's funny because when I was wrestling in high school, in my freshman year, I would always be paired with this one guy who was business minded. And towards our senior year of high school, he approached me and said, "Hey, let's start a business where we go door to door, business to business, where we would advertise businesses to consumers by selling door coupons." So I won't go too detailed into that business, but obviously it didn't work out. But what we did do was go door to door and try to speak with the managers. So it was a very, cold door knocking approach. And ultimately, when that didn't work, he said to me, "Hey, if you're willing to do that, you should probably head into real estate because there are people who make a lot of money and good careers, door knocking and cold calling, doing the things that you are willing to do without anybody forcing you to do them." So I didn't think about it much at the time, but when a seed's planted in your mind, it starts growing out of its own volition. So somewhere around in March or April 2017, I made a pretty quick decision to say, "Hey, I think this is the best thing I could do right out of high school," because I started to develop that business mindset. After reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the most common personal finance books, another seed was planted in my mind where I said, "Hey, I need to learn some skills, especially sales, of how to start my own business, how to grow it, how to basically increase my income in a way where it's not tied to a time constraint like a job. It's best to work for commissions, and it's best to really have your own business." So the easiest barrier to entry of that was real estate. And I didn't know at the time that you could start selling real estate at 18, but I watched other channels, and you might come across this guy named Brian Casella, who I've received coaching from before. He's a great guy. Talked to him and been coached from him. And he basically had a lot of content that said, "Hey, you can do this starting from ground zero with no skills, no money, no connections," which is basically the position that I was in right out of high school. So took the licensing courses while I was in high school. I graduated in June 2017, applied to take my test, and I got it done in August of 2017. And from then on, it's just, hitting the pavement, going through all the hard times, all the hard work, and then just doing the business for almost 3 years now.
I love it. You mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is one of my favorite books. I think I've given out maybe 20 copies of that book just because it's had such a huge impact on my life. And I think everyone should read it, right? And so I love you kind of thinking about like, hey, I want to have a business, and this is a path for that, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of young people who kind of have that similar thought process. Do you, in hindsight, maybe let's just start with, what advice do you have for someone who's maybe thinking about getting into real estate at a young age? Any things they should think about before they kind of go down that path?
So you don't know what you don't know. And if I were to really give all the information I know now to my 17, 18-year-old self, it's not that the information isn't useful. It's that you can't really process it without having a good perspective. So I wouldn't do anything differently now than what I did when I was 17 or 18, is that you have to be a sort of a fire hose or absorb all this information and then pick and choose where you want to head into. I'm still 21 and granted, I don't know what I don't know yet, but it's always keeping an open mind and seeing where you can fit best, how you can best provide value. What do you actually like? Because ultimately, the length that you do your work is dependent on how much you like your work and how much you find meaning in it. So for me, I'm a results oriented guy. I probably won't be as fulfilled working in a salaried position as I would working, you know, uh, in a results oriented space, which, commissions is one of them. But, for the younger people who are thinking about getting into real estate, be open minded, just see where opportunity lies. Try to work for someone who knows more than you. Obviously, most people know more than you, but be in a position where it's a learning environment, especially when you're younger. Rich Dad Poor Dad, the book says it very well. Kiyosaki said you should work to learn instead of work to earn. And I think in your earliest years, when you're 20, it's important to have that learning mindset because, as I said before, you don't know what you don't know. And it's really all about connecting multiple dots together, those dots that you pick up along the way where you earn that experience. So always approach it, at least this is what I do. I approach it from a position of learning so that I can apply what I learned towards my own endeavors.
Again, wise beyond your years. I think that was a fantastic answer. And, you do have to approach these types of things from a learning mindset. I think, and we kind of talked on it before we hit record, so many people want to get into real estate because of kind of this glitz and glamour. They watch the HGTV shows and they see these huge commission amounts for people selling multi-million-dollar homes. And they say, I want to do that. And it's not saying you can't do that or you can't work your way up to that. But for 95% of the real estate agents out there, that is not what the business is, right? It's really hard work. It's ups and downs every single day. It's inconsistency in not only the amount of deals you have, but the actual commission that you earn. And so coming at it from a mindset of, hey, I'm going to try and learn versus I need to earn a ton or I need to, I want to sell $5 million houses so I can make $150,000, I think is a really, really powerful mindset. Can you talk a little bit about, how does so someone's interested in it, what do you think they should expect in their first year, especially as someone selling real estate at 18? Like what kind of struggles did you have just being a younger agent?
That's a good question. And in terms of expectations, I like to put it this way. It's like setting the proper boundaries and, expectations like you would with a client. If someone who's heading into the business doesn't have the right expectations, just like a buyer who has the expectations of buying $1 million house, but has an income that doesn't allow them to purchase that, you got to set those expectations and boundaries properly. What I would expect for someone who is heading into the business really young is that unless you have a lot of connections and a good network right from the get-go, it's probably going to take a little bit longer for you to develop that momentum that most other people have when they start. Because if you think about it, my contacts list on my phone when I was just starting was full of 17 and 18-year-olds. And, not everyone's going to be buying a property at that age, right? So it's going to be a harder momentum to build. But when you're door knocking and cold calling and doing open houses, doing whatever ways you market your business, those methods, it's going to eventually start to tip. And that point came to me around more than a year in. So if you can basically survive and continue to do all the right things, the right actions, you'll see momentum shift in your favor where it's not necessarily you don't have to work as hard, but it doesn't feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall constantly every single day. So, unless you have a really expansive network that is rich in real estate and, is able to invest, I would curb your expectations of finding a deal really fast, but you should expect yourself to put a lot of work in just to get some sort of result.
Yeah. And so for a lot of new agents, and I talk to a lot of them specifically because of this channel and some of the groups I do, is that momentum thing's real for everybody. And you make a good point for someone who's younger. you don't really have this leg up that someone does who has a network of people who are ready to buy or sell. It hit the nail on the head. When I started in real estate at 18, I had a contact list full of people that were just moving into their first house, and we're not even thinking about buying an actual house, right? They were thinking about renting, they're thinking about going to school, they were thinking about, and so, you're right. There's kind of a leg up that people who get in this business at an older age have, but setting those expectations and understanding that, I think, is huge, and understanding that it's probably going to take you a year, 18 months, to really make something sustainable, like you said, where things start to pop and momentum starts to get on your side. So I think that's a powerful piece to it.
Yeah.
What I think, and I'm interested in your thoughts, I think that younger agents have a lot of advantages in the industry as well.
Yeah.
Can you touch on what you think some of your advantages were, or what some of the advantages are for someone getting in the business at 18, 19, or 20 years old?
So I think my main advantage was that, I think I put this in multiple videos in the past, where you can't really see this while you're doing it, but when you look back at some of the interactions that you've had, think about this. You have a kid who's like, say, 5 years old, who's trying to sell lemonade on the sidewalk. Whereas if you take the same situation and you have a 50-year-old trying to sell lemonade at the sidewalk, most people would give the 5-year-old a chance more than the 50-year-old. And some people might not like the way I say this, but when you look at the 50-year-old who's trying to start the same business as someone who is younger, you're going to wonder what the 50-year-old has been doing the entirety of his life when you're comparing them to the younger person. So what I noticed was that people were much more willing to give me a chance just because I was younger, I was hungrier, I was full of energy, and I basically gave them more energy, more attention than some of the older agents. And, that comes with some sort of advantages and disadvantages. They give you a chance because other agents who are more busier, who have more business, can't specifically give all that attention to that one client. So it's more about your energy. Are you inquisitive? Are you listening to them? Are you someone who's willing to help them out more so than the other agent? If so, and you have a good smile on your face, you have good energy, I think you have a very good chance of getting that first few deals and then turning that into momentum. Because, we just like younger people for a lot of the older guys. That's just what I notice.
Yeah. And I think kind of what you're touching on too, and I've heard you talk about in your videos, like this idea of potential, and people like kind of and gravitate towards that potential. It's also kind of like this underdog story that we all love in society. We want to root for, the guy who's swinging above his weight class necessarily, right? And you're right. If you're young and you have energy and you're hungry and you show people like, hey, I want to do this, I'm going to do this with or without you, whether you help me, whether you sell your house or not, I'm going to be successful at this. It's an infectious type energy. And I think that is really powerful. And you're right. I think it can win you some deals where people who have been in this business for a really long time kind of are going through the motions. And I'm sure you've met agents like that, where this is how they've done it and this is how they always do it. And what we all know is it's 2021 and we're doing this interview right now, but times are changing. The internet's changed a lot of things. We have YouTube videos, we have different education sources. There's different ways to market your business, different ways to lead generate. And so sometimes those people that are doing it 20 years, or someone who's just getting it now, but isn't tapped into kind of the new school way of marketing and lead generation, the younger agent has a leg up on those folks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So the other thing I think is an advantage for new agents, especially versus someone who's getting in the business and is older, is, and maybe this had an impact on you, it had an impact on me when I got into business, was my expenses were really low, right? Older agents, if you think about it, and I think part of the reason why the success rate is so low for real estate agents is because it can take 6 months, a year, 18 months to build momentum. Those older agents that have mortgages and kids and are used to making X number of dollars per year are now going into a space where they've got to eat what they earn And if it's not coming right away, they struggle with that. Do you feel like that was an advantage, kind of starting off younger, maybe not having a huge salary and being able to kind of live modestly for a little bit while you worked your way up?
100%. I believe that the best ways for you to start in any business whatsoever is to start it when you're young, just because you don't have expenses. I still live with my parents, and that's going to be that way for, the immediate future. And, if you're still living with your parents and you're starting a business, that's probably the best financial position you could be in. Because let's take, for example, the person that does have a mortgage and a family, they just quit their job and they're starting a business and they're starting from ground zero, just like I am. That is a much harder pill to swallow and situation to accept, albeit it might spur that person to take massive action. It's pretty stressful. And what you'll notice in sales is that the psychology of the salesperson has to be of, peak performance. Because if you're in a desperate position, you're desperate for money, that's going to show itself in your language, your body language, the way you speak to the person. If you're desperate, just like in the dating world, you're not going to have much success trying to have someone do business with you or associate with you, just because it's a basic human nature thing. We want to be people who are abundant in energy and who can be detached somewhat to, you could say, the outcome. So the best way that you could be detached to the outcome, whether you make a sale or not, whether they sign the listing contract with you or not, is by not being in a position where you're desperate. So expenses, if they're really high and you have a very high churn rate, you can't really have the right psychology, especially when you're starting.
Yeah. Again, you touched on another great point. Salespeople, I think, and we shouldn't even call it maybe sales. In real estate, I'm a firm believer you can't convince someone to buy or sell their house if they don't want to, right? And so this whole idea that we're in sales, I disagree with. I think we're, when you go and you get your real estate license, you're helping people navigate buying a house, or you're helping people market their house and list it for sale. And so you're exactly right. And I've talked about this a ton, is you can't have that salesy approach. If people feel like you're in it for the money and you're not, you only want to work with them or talk with them because you need that transaction, it ends up going way worse. And you'll end up hitting, having a lot less success than if you just come at it from a place of providing value, working with these people. Hey, I want to do what's best for you. And if that means you don't sell your house or we don't buy something, that's totally fine, because I'm here to help you navigate this real estate process and part of your life. You know what I mean? So I think you hit that beautifully on the head, is just, and you kind of wrapped it in with the low expenses thing, right? So being young, I think a lot of people think about, I've never bought a house, I don't have a fancy car. How can I actually go about selling real estate? When in reality, I think those things are huge benefits. As someone, and I can guess, right? Like when I started out, I didn't have a fancy vehicle, right? I lived at home for part of it. I lived with roommates. Like, were those ever like internal struggles for you, like going out and actually meeting clients, or meeting clients and showing up with, again, some people feel like you have to drive $100,000 car to sell real estate. Not having those things, was that ever a hurdle for you, or a hurdle for some of your clients?
I don't think it was a hurdle for any of my clients, but as with any 18-year-old, it is a struggle internally, because you want to project a good image and you don't really know, again, your stage of development in life is not at the point where you can just say, I don't care about my image. I do care about my image, even to this day, and probably for the next few decades. Any person who says that they don't care is, I think, lying to themselves. There definitely is an insecurity when you're driving a 20-year-old car that's just as old as you and is not as nice as the other realtors who are driving a Mercedes Benz or a BMW. But again, there's only certain things that you can't control. And, I can't control what vehicle I drive unless I sell like 15 houses in a year, which, would be amazing. But, you got to make do with the resources that you have. And as an underdog, as you mentioned, as someone who is just starting, you kind of have that grit, that the industriousness that people admire. And I would even argue that when people see someone who is young and hustling and has, limited resources, but is still putting in more effort or the same effort as the higher experienced agents, there's got to be some level of respect there and a willingness to do business with that underdog. And that's something that I've experienced with my first client, my most recent client. In fact, the listing that I just sold recently, the lady, she said that she's had 6 realtors try to contact her through phone, email, messages, etc., using all the different kinds of ways to prospect. But she chose me because not only was I industrious in my follow-up and persistent, but I was someone who had a good energy, and she couldn't explain why it was like that. And that's somehow something that I experienced multiple times. And I said, there might be an advantage here, because if they're willing to do business with me because of a vibe that I have, then that's something that is priceless. And that's an edge in the marketplace that other agents can't replace. So despite those insecurities that you might have, there is an edge that every single person has in business that they just have to learn how to exploit.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, well said. Let's touch on, so you've been in the business a couple of years. What lead generation sources have you relied on? Like what's worked for you? And, you talked about the listing, like maybe touch on, as a new agent, because you don't have that database or that sphere of influence that some other people have, what worked for you in terms of lead generation, or what is working for you?
So in the beginning, when I started getting into real estate, I did 100% door knocking. And I didn't have the resources to cold call because you need phone numbers, you need a dialer, all that stuff. So door knocking was my main form of lead generation. And then I started doing more open houses when my mentor, who I met, a few weeks into the business to sign my first listing with, he recommended that if you want quick money, you should get into open houses and work with buyers. So, there was this misconception that I had from people that I watched on YouTube, that open houses aren't the best way to do business. And, it is what it is. It was a mistake on my part to believe that. I should have experimented more earlier. But open houses turned out to be the best ways to earn business for me, because they don't have to be your own listings. They can be the listings of other agents. And there are tons of agents who have listings that are sitting on the market for more than 1 week. Surprisingly, 1 week is a long time in this area. That they don't want to hold open houses anymore. So all I did was I texted those agents, or I called them saying, "Hey, I see your house is listed for sale, and you don't have people holding it open. Can I do it for this weekend? I will give you all the buyer leads as well. I will take the buyer leads, but any buyer leads that I close escrow on, I will give you a referral fee on." That's usually enough for them to say yes. I'm pretty sure that they would have said yes anyway, because they want to market their property. They want to make it look like they're doing something for their sellers. So I think that was a little bit funny. But when I started to understand that open houses brought in quick buyers, that's when I started doing them more. Cold calling, I did a lot of for sale by owners and expireds. It's not something that panned out pretty well for me. And I shifted my strategy to focus back on open houses. Because for me, at least, they work much more than door knocking and cold calling. And I never touched much on the online marketing stuff, just because I wanted to keep my expenses low. And online marketing, just based off of what my coach was saying, it's a more of a long-term lead generation strategy. So those are the main 3: cold calling, door knocking, and open houses.
Fantastic. Open houses, you're right. A lot of people don't realize that you can do open houses for other people's listings. And there are a lot of listing agents, because they have the listing, they don't necessarily want to hold it open. There's a lot of listing agents who just focus on listings, but they don't want to do the open houses, right? And you're right. There's also a lot of mixed reviews on it. And I'm with you. I've heard that time and time again from new agents. If you can get into open houses, and it's a great way. I think it's a great way to do a couple things. A, meet prospective buyers. B, start to have those real estate conversations where you have to have them early, and you have to have them often in real estate to be able to be successful and to kind of get comfortable with those. And so even just interacting with people is huge. And then I think in the day and age we are in today, so many new real estate agents struggle with, I'm not busy, so how am I going to get business? Well, if you're at an open house, it's a great time to shoot a video, take a photo, reach out to the people that you do know, or, people you met at previous open house and say, hey, look, I'm at this open house. I'm working with this person and we're showing this home around, right? You can kind of show yourself doing real estate related activities. And that kind of helps build the momentum in other people's mind of, okay, Jeff actually knows what he's talking about. He's doing open houses every weekend. He's talking with people. He's having real estate conversations. And so I think open houses are really powerful. How often would you try and do them, or how often do you try and do them? And
Every single week.
Has that gone away with the pandemic?
Yeah, it definitely has in the Los Angeles market. I mean, we're California and we're the strictest area in the entire nation. So that's always been a struggle. But before the pandemic, I would aim for every single weekend. So the way I would structure my schedule was that, let's say it's Monday, I want to be first in line for any open houses that I could get. And typically what I look for are 3-bed, 2-bath homes, or, larger. They're vacant listings, so you don't have to kick any sellers out of their house for the weekend. They're easy, they're remodeled. Hopefully they're located in good areas of my cities. Every agent should do their research on their own market, but Monday, Tuesday, I would try to secure an open house. Typically I would get it by Wednesday. And then say I have an open house scheduled for the weekend, I would door knock the surrounding area on Thursday and Friday. I would print out flyers, give them to all the people who are in the area. And then obviously Saturday and Sunday, hold them open. And then Monday and Tuesday, the following days after the open house, I would follow up with those leads and then repeat the cycle of trying to schedule another open house. So obviously I wouldn't be holding an open house if I have buyers scheduled for showings, but that was the whole point, was to get buyers to basically look at houses with me. And then, some buyers, they're okay signing a buyer contract. Others are not. But my goal is really to be the source of contact for their real estate needs. And you touched on this earlier, where we're not necessarily salespeople. I would say we're more educators. People have already made their decisions in their mind, whether they want to buy or sell. We just have to make sure that all the obstacles are clear and that they know what to do. So, the easiest way to do that is by being there present at the open house when they're literally thinking about buying a property.
Yeah. I love your open house strategy because for me, I think it kind of does a really good job of helping you continue real estate related activities throughout the week and kind of build that momentum. Like we talked about kind of the long-term momentum of real estate, where it might take you a year for things to really start to pop, but to kind of get that motor going, you have to do real estate related activities every single day. And you have to be in the business and you have to mix and mingle and you really have to kind of hustle to make these things work. And so I love that you kind of figured out your open house for the weekend, and then you'd go out and door knock and really try and drum up that business. I think so many new agents, part of the reason they struggle is they get their license and they wait for the phone to ring. And it's just not ever going to happen, right? You have to go and earn that business, and you have to do real estate related activities every single day, or it's just not going to be, you're not going to build that momentum, right? You need to go, I said it once, you need to be busy in real estate before you actually get busy selling real estate. You know what I mean? And it's this strange thing. Awesome. What resources, are there books that you look to or podcasts? This doesn't have to be real estate related, but just kind of overall that you enjoy, that you mentioned on touched on Rich Dad Poor Dad. Any other YouTube channels you look at or find inspiration from? Can you touch on those things?
Yeah. So before I got into real estate sales myself, I was heavily consuming the content of Brian Casella. He is one of the top dogs of YouTube for real estate right now. I liked him because he showed what he was doing. He wasn't just someone that was all about blitz and the glamour and all that HGTV stuff. I personally have never watched any of that stuff, so I at least had the right expectations. Another person that I followed a lot after I started real estate was Joshua Smith, GSD Mode. If you search it up on YouTube, he later ended up being my coach that I paid for. I took his coaching program. I consulted with him, and the way he approached business was just like that, a business. And it helped me so much because when I was figuring stuff out, I was kind of just throwing things against the wall and hoping that they would stick, and not necessarily knowing how to track my numbers and know all that stuff. But when you start to clearly lay out what you need to do every single day, not only from an hourly basis, but in terms of your numbers, then things start to become much more clear for me. Those are the two main sources. Obviously, there are the books. You could read The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, which I do recommend to see how old school business was done. And those principles still remain true today. But I wouldn't specifically narrow yourself to just those pieces of information. Your business is a culmination of a lot of things that you could get from a lot of people. You just have to know what works and what doesn't. And ultimately, you just have to track your numbers, see what works, but always keep your mind open because as we have seen recently, business is always moving. It's always changing. You can't just rely on one strategy like the open house because anything could happen and you might have to shift.
Yeah. You have to try out new things because what works for me is going to work differently for Kenji and it's going to work differently for you, whoever's watching this, right? It's some people are going to be great at open houses and they're going to love it. Other people are going to find that they do better with internet lead generation or social media, whatever that looks like. And so I love that mindset of you have to test things out. You have to try different things. You have to figure out what works, but then you have to get it down to a trackable metric that you can duplicate and reproduce on a consistent basis so that you can have some predictable results. So fantastic stuff. Anything else before we wrap up here that like any other piece of advice or thoughts you want to give anyone who's watching this, maybe they're younger and thinking about getting into real estate?
When you're younger, you don't know what you don't know. So it's always important to have that as the forefront of your mind. Absorb as much as you can from mentors. And if you could have someone to rely on in the beginning when you don't know, not only will it will save you a lot of trouble legally. Of course you want to avoid that stuff, but it helps to have someone who has laid out the groundwork for you. Have that person, within arm's length. Find resources might be a really good tool. Sometimes you won't have anyone to ask questions immediately, especially in a very fast-paced environment like real estate. So have someone alongside you that can help you and then stick to them and serve them, be of value, because ultimately your income in real estate sales is highly correlated with what kind of value you can provide to people.
Absolutely. And I don't want people to get fearful too of that, like what you don't know, you don't know. I think one of the beautiful things about real estate is owning your own business in general. This isn't just selling real estate. Owning your own business in general is like a self-development course wrapped into real life. You have to take in different lessons and you have to learn from those things and you have to evolve and you have to adapt and there's going to be highs and lows. But that's part of the process. And I think a lot of people who get into owning their own business or being an entrepreneur, one of the things they love about it is you can stumble, you can fall, you can learn from it, and you can adjust. And it makes you a better person in the long run because you've had these lessons, because you've figured it out, right? And so I love that piece of advice is, connect with a team or connect with another agent or a mentor agent that can help you along the way. But also don't be afraid of the things you don't know, because at the end of the day, those are going to help you grow the most,
Yeah,
Awesome.
I agree.
I love it. Well, Kenji, thank you so much for jumping on, man. We might have to do a second version or a part 2 of this too, because I think you just have so much wisdom. And for only being 21 years old, I think that's fantastic. So keep doing what you're doing, man. And what we'll do is there anything you want to promote? I'll definitely put your YouTube channel in the description so that people can go check out some of your other videos. But anything else you want to promote before we wrap up here?
No, that's about it. I do want to pay my dues to the people who I learned from. So again, Brian Casella, you can look him up on YouTube. Joshua Smith, GSD Mode. He's a great coach, great business person. He's someone that I want to model my life, even outside of real estate. He might not be the most active guy on social media, but that's because he's busy getting shit done, which is what GSD Mode stands for. So go find him on YouTube. He's got a lot of content, a podcast. Other than that, you could find me on YouTube. So just type in my name. I'm sure Jeff will find a way to link it on the podcast. Currently at around just past 2,000 subs. So it's a smaller growing channel, but it's a channel that's focused on information, but not necessarily on entertainment. So, entertainment can only get you so far in the real estate industry. It's mostly about what you learn and can apply.
Fantastic advice. And we'll make sure all those channels are linked in the description. So Joshua, GSD Mode, he's actually out here in Phoenix too, which is great. And Brian Casella as well. So Awesome. Appreciate you being on here, man. And like I said, we might have to do a part 2 in the future. And I love all the wisdom and everything you're able to share. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jeff.